used to drive on I-95, Interstate 95, all the time. And sometimes I would be going north of Baltimore and up past Philadelphia. And if you drive through Philadelphia on I-95, you go right by their sports complex, which is on the east side of the city, where you'll see their baseball stadium, the football stadium. And then they had this additional arena building called the Spectrum, where the 76ers and the Flyers play, but where also you could go to concerts and the circus, all sorts of other events that would come to town. They tore down the old arena and started building a new one. And as they were in the midst of construction, they called it Spectrum 2. But like they've done all around the country, the city and the developers were in negotiations with some corporate owners in Philadelphia, and they signed a $40 million deal with Core States Bank for the naming rights of the arena for 21 years. So that arena in 1996, when it opened, was known as the Core States Arena in big neon letters on the side of the building. But you know the way things go with banks and mergers and remergers. And so it was just in 1998, after 2 years, that the letters came down from the Core States Arena, and it became known as First Union Bank Arena in 1998. And then I was driving up I-95 a couple years later, and woe and behold, it wasn't the First Union Bank Arena, it was the Wachovia Arena in 2003. But hold on, in 2010 it became the Wells Fargo Arena, and I really couldn't tell you what it's called today. You may have had an experience of changing your own name. Maybe it happened through the process of getting a nickname or two. Maybe you acquired a professional title like doctor or professor. You may have changed your name on the occasion of getting married, or you may have changed your name for some other purpose altogether. You can do that, I understand, if the internet can be believed, for $139 if you go online. God got into the name-changing business with Abram and Sarai. We first encountered them in the book of Genesis. Abram is 99 years old. Sarai is advanced in years too, and she is barren. But in Genesis 17, God makes a covenant with them. And against all seeming reality, God says, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You shall be the ancestor of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be Abram, but your name shall be Abraham. For I have made you the ancestor of a multitude of nations." And a few verses later, God says, "As for Sarai, your wife, you shall not call her Sarai, but Sarah shall be her name. I will bless her, and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she will give rise to nations. Kings of peoples shall come from her." Incredible. Absolutely incredible. But in changing their names, God is changing their destiny. Their purpose has changed. God is doing a new thing in their lives. This name-changing phenomena comes up a few times in the Bible. You'll remember the time where Jacob is wrestling with this mysterious man, and Jacob finally says, "I'm not going to let you go until you bless me." And this man, who is God says, "You shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have striven with God and humans, and you have prevailed." There are two name changes of particular note in the New Testament. You might think of them off the top of your head. One took place on that road to Damascus when Saul, the Pharisee, who had been prosecuting the church, has his encounter with Jesus, and Jesus calls him Paul, renames him. It's the most dramatic makeover I think perhaps we have in the Bible, as this Saul is transformed from one who sought to literally wipe out the church through his zeal as a Pharisee, and instead becomes one of the most ardent apostles of the gospel. But in the second occasion, in the Gospel of John, we come to a second renaming in the New Testament. He brought Simon to Jesus, who looked at him and said, "You are Simon, son of John. You are to be called Cephas," which is translated Peter. Now, Cephas is Greek for rock. So it's a pretty extraordinary name for a disciple who will deny Jesus 3 times and rebuke him. And then in Matthew 16, Jesus says, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." But the road to the cross in those weeks prior were rocky for Peter, to say the least. And in the passage that we have today, Jesus gives him another name, a shocking name. He began to teach them that the Son of Man must undergo great suffering and be rejected by the elders, chief priests, and scribes, and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him. I don't know about you, but I would not want to be in Peter's shoes for the next 60 seconds. Turning around, looking at his disciples, Jesus rebuked Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan. For you are setting your mind not on divine things, but on human things." I really sympathize with Peter, because I think his motivation in saying to Jesus, "Wait, hold it, no, this is not going to happen. What are you talking about?" is because he is thinking of Jesus as the Messiah. And it was just unimaginable to him that this Messiah, the Son of God, could suffer and die on the cross. He couldn't even fathom it. It didn't make any sense at all. How could it be? And up to this time, there's kind of like all the baggage behind this scene of Jewish thought that had this vision of a Messiah who would be strong, who would restore the Jewish people, who, here they were under the heel of the Romans, and this Messiah was going to come and set things straight with power. And yet, here we have a Christ who says he's going to suffer and die on the cross. It just made no sense. Peter wasn't alone, though, probably, in his thinking. But as we know by now, Peter has appointed himself as press secretary for the rest of the disciples. But it's quite possible that they were wondering, too, how could this be? What are you talking about? And maybe Jesus, or maybe Peter speaks for us, too, in our own minds of, Lord, how is it that this Son of God should go and suffer in this way? But the second shock, if you will, in this passage comes from what Jesus says next. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake and for the sake of the gospel will save it. If any want to become my followers, if any of us want to bear the name of Christian, we're to take up the cross and follow Christ. If we want to save our lives, we need to lose it. Now, when Janet and I were dating, and there's some discrepancy about actually when we started dating, the time frame for me is 3 months before she will acknowledge that we were dating. But there was a point at which we both knew and accepted that we were dating. And we did this exercise. It's not to make us seem just tremendously nerdy, but we did a word exercise as a way to further get to know each other. And we said, okay, let's pick the titles or the names that we would use to describe ourselves and kind of list them in a column in order of importance to us. So some of the names for me in the year 2000 my list could have gone like this: American, son, brother, uncle, employee at the time of the city of Baltimore, Baltimore native, University of Michigan grad, sports fan, art lover, traveler, Scrabble player. Where would I put Christian in that rank of names to describe myself? Where would other people say, if they were thinking of me, well, where would I put Christian in terms of describing Pat? How important do I think that is to him? And what names do I wonder would you use if you did that same exercise of ranking the names that might describe you in your life? What would all the possible names be? And where would Christian fit in your list in terms of importance for you? God gave Abram and Sarai a new name, and then God did something impossible. God gave Saul a new name, and then did something impossible. God gave Peter a new name and did something impossible. God has given us, through the cross and resurrection, a new name as Christians. And what does God want to do with our lives?